Does everyone have a seat at the table? If not, we'll move chairs in and be close. The trustees, the president, the board of governors members. I see a loose president walking around there. Well. Mac, move up so we can keep an eye on you. Everybody move up. Hugh wants to be at the table. You got plenty of that. Thank all of you for coming today. What a great turnout. This is our first Board of Governors, Board of Trustees conference, and I want to thank President Gibbons for her hospitality, and her staff always does a great job. They've invited us to their campus, or maybe we invited ourselves to their campus. But it's a lovely facility, and thank you so much, Judy. You make us feel so welcome, and it's beautiful. What a beautiful room. We committed in January of this year to come together twice a year, once to discuss our budget and again to discuss our legislative agenda. We recognize that all of you are very busy people. You wouldn't be in this level of service if you were not very busy people, and we appreciate you taking time to be here for what we think is the most important issue in our state. It demonstrates your commitment to this, our important issue, our great university system, and to the job you're doing. Together, we are a very strong voice. Look around the room. If all of you can't get something done, it's not going to get done. So we appreciate it. We're going to be an advocate for our system together for what we believe is the most valuable asset of our state. As trustees, you play the key role in the system governance process. Working together, we are directed by the Constitution to achieve excellence of our universities through teaching students, advancing research, and providing public service. And by the way, a copy of that constitutional amendment is in your notebook today, and I think it's important that we all memorize it, remember it, because it's what we need to live by. Your responsibility in that Constitution is dual, and this is very important. First, to understand and support the broader system goals that we're charged to by that Constitution. The broader system goals, and it's sometimes difficult to remember that when you're on an individual university trustee. And then to operate and manage your institution with the highest governance, performance, and accountability standards. Our board has identified a number of critical issues. These include governance, where we seek to clarify our roles and responsibilities, quality and access, providing students with the very best education possible and keeping our doors open for eligible students, funding, how to keep our public education affordable and the facilities at the appropriate level. 25% of the system's current classrooms was built 40 years ago, and they need renovation. The state university system now has 30% less space per student in its university system than many other states. These are also issues faced for your boards when you prioritize your PICO list. Today, we've invited you to learn more about our state university system, about higher education from a national and state perspective. Later today, there are 2 breakout sessions, one for audit and accountability issues and another for presidential review. I hope you can stay for those breakout sessions. They'll be very beneficial to your board. Finally, at 3 p.m., we will come back together and learn about the state university system budget. All of us are interested in the state university system budget, so I'm expecting us to be at the table again for that conversation. I thank you for being here. I appreciate your time more than you know. I know the time it takes, and thank you again. Many of us are new at the table, and I think it's appropriate that we introduce ourselves to everyone in the room, and many of our trustees are on the front row, so when we get to John Hitt, we're going to jump back to you, Mac, and go around and then come back. I'm Carolyn Roberts, and I'm very blessed to chair the Board of Governors, and I've been in public service for the university system one way or the other since 1989 when I was appointed to the Board of Regents.
Sheila McDevitt, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Board of Governors, and I've been involved in education for a long, long time as well, private university, private higher ed as well, and I'm very happy to be involved in this process. It's God's work. It's a very good thing to be doing.
I'm Chico Perez from Orlando, and I'm budget chair for the Board of Governors.
You're very popular today.
And I'm Arlen Chase. I'm on the board by virtue of being the president of the Advisory Council of Faculty Senate, and this is my second term.
I'm Hafsian Singh, we brought up Gulf Coast University. I've been here since the beginning. I've been in the academia for quite a number of years, in private and public institutions as well.
I'm Gus Stavros. I've been involved in Florida State University in USF. I've been involved in education. I'm a member of the Board of Governors. I've been involved in education for 82 years. That's my age.
I'm John Yoakum. I've been married half that time, and but I'm Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees at the University of Central Florida.
Judy Genshaft, I'm President of the University of South Florida. Welcome.
I'm Rita Malone, Chair of the Trustees of the University of South Florida, and also welcome to the
I'm Manoj Chopra, Chair of the Faculty Senate at the University of Central Florida. I'm Rick Walton, Chair of the Board of Trustees.
John Hitt, President of the University of Central Florida.
Malcolm Griffith, Vice Chair of the Board of University of Florida.
Gibbons, I'm the Chief Trustee of the
Ron Martin, I'm the Provost of Staff.
From Kendrick, I'm the Vice Chair of the University of Florida. From Garcia, Diana Morgan, Chair of the Board at the University of Florida.
I'm Debbie Sembler, and I'm on the Board of Trustees at USF.
I'm Cheryl Thomasina. I'm a trustee at University of South Florida.
I'm Bartlett Harless. I'm the student body president here at USF, and I'm also a trustee.
Robert Saran, Board of Trustees, USF.
Please come and speak close to your mics.
And we'll start right back.
Marbella Hernandez, student vice
We have a couple of trustees over here.
Oh, please, yes.
Catherine Kelly with the University of West Florida Board of Trustees.
Maurice Holden, Florida A&M University Faculty Senate President, Board of Trustees.
Bob Brown, new trustee of Florida A&M.
John Kavanaugh, President, University of West Florida.
Kyle Kavanaugh, not related to John Kavanaugh, Senior Vice President of Administration at the University of Florida.
John Delaney, President of the University of North Florida.
Bruce Taylor, Chair of the University of North Florida.
Leslie Pantine, Board of Trustees, Florida State University.
Stan Marshall from Tallahassee Board of Governors, President of Florida State University at one time.
Bob Johnson, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of New College of Florida.
And Mike Michelson, President of New College of Florida.
Solomon Badger, Board of Trustees, Florida A&M University.
Bill Jennings, newly elected Chair of Florida A&M.
Carl White, new trustee, Florida A&M University.
John Temple, Board of Governors, and also past Chair of FAU.
Dick Peg,
Board of Trustees.
Dick Pegnetter, Interim President of Florida Gulf Coast University.
Randy Hollinger, student body president at the University of Central Florida and also a Board of Trustees member.
Mark Rosenberg, Chancellor.
And Ann Duncan, our Board of Governors member, is sitting right there. She must have walked out a minute. Before we go forward with this program, yesterday we had a new trustee orientation, and many of them are here today. What an impressive group of volunteers, and I thank them for being here an additional day, but when you see the trustees and the quality of their life and what they've been involved in and their accomplishments, it makes you realize that being a trustee is a wonderful opportunity for service, or these individuals would not have put their name forward. So I thank you for that day and for your commitment to service. Chancellor Rosenberg.
Madam Chair, members of the boards, thank you for being here. The intent of the discussion this morning is to step back for a moment and put a focus on where we are in higher education in this country, what some of the broader national trends are, and as well how they relate to state trends. Because after all, while we might think that we are a fortress, that Fortress Florida is operative, the reality is there is a broader context nationally and globally for the work in which we do and for the environment into which our students graduate. So we thought it would be appropriate to spend some time on that and then to have an open discussion on any issues that you might want to raise as they would relate either to those themes or other themes that are pertinent to the kind of conversations that we ought to be having and will be having. We, of course, will be focusing on specifics this afternoon as they relate to our budget and budget process, so I would request that we leave that conversation till this afternoon in the meeting that will be chaired by Tico Perez. We have not had a general assembly, if you will, before of board members, yet it is critically important that we know who we are, that we understand what the challenges are, and that we find a way to work together on so many of the issues around which we share a common concern. My thinking on that is that a rising tide raises all ships. And in the context of the challenges that we have, the growth of the demand for our services, for our access, and the important role that we play, not only in the state of Florida, but nationally as a megatrend state, you are in a position to help us get the message out and make sure that we are having the impact for our students and for the state that we need to if the quality of life in our state is to improve. So having said that, Larry Abel, who is the Abel Provost of the Florida State University, and I will share some insights, facts, directions with you. Of course, Provost Abel needs no introduction. Truly, he is the senior provost by far in our state university system. I think Larry, in fact, has gone through all the board forms that we've had in the modern 20th century almost, all the governance forms, but more importantly, he's a respected player on the national scene, very active in a set of discussions nationally that essentially inform our work. So, Larry, thank you so much for being with us, and we will proceed with your permission. Dr. Abel.
Thank you, and I want to thank Chancellor Rosenberg and Nate Johnson for all of the interactions and assistance as we discussed issues. So, Madam Chairman, Presidents, Governors, and Trustees, what I'd like to do, in I hope under 15 minutes, is to bring three things together. One is the report of the Spellings Commission on the future of higher education in this country. The second is Norm Augustine's report on the role of national competitiveness, economic development, and higher education. And then data on the shifting demographics in Florida and what that might mean to us, both nationally and within Florida. So one of the things that is troublesome, and this was brought up in particular in Norm Augustine's report on economics, is that the United States was #1 in the education attainment of its citizens for the 55 to 65-year-old group. Every single year since then, we have fallen. And depending on the comparison, as you see here, Korea, France, Spain, Canada, their younger generations are all better educated than their older generations. That is not the case in the United States. Without education, without the innovation that comes with it, we have economic and other issues that are going to affect us. The return on investment is huge. I mean, you don't have to review it over and over again, but it is worthwhile to note that the investment that the state makes and the individual makes in their education is returned tenfold very, very quickly. And without that education, without the infrastructure that the taxes provide and the jobs, the United States cannot continue to compete. Florida has grown. In fact, in terms of southern states, it has grown more than any other state. In terms of its growth, you can see, well, I can't see from here, but a lot, 25%. What has happened is that the funding has not kept up with the growth. And I want to use this next slide to say why the current 4% budget cut is so much more significant than it would appear at first glance. If you take a look, at right here, the state started really investing. And we went along, and then the stock market bubble, and whether you call it a recession or a slowdown, we took $207 million as a system cut right here. However, we had all of this growth going on at that time. Now, if you see, we've been a number of years down here, a little bit of growth, and then a cut. And I think that cut is so much more severe for 4 reasons. 1, we are not coming off a period of growth. 2, there are at least 4 hidden cuts, that one of which the Chancellor pointed out in his report, underfunding of the formula. 2, every school in Florida has improved in retention and graduation, and those students are unfunded to the tune of tens of millions of dollars. 3, the state of Florida cut us loose in our accounting and financial systems, and a conservative estimate is that universities have invested $200 million in those enterprise resource systems. You might have seen Alex Sink's comments that they've spent $89 million planning, and it crashed. So they're starting over from scratch. And finally, because the salaries have not kept up in Florida in terms of competing nationally, is the 4th hidden cut that we face. We have to find those dollars. So 4% may not seem like a great deal, but on top of the brief history, it is a lot. Anybody who travels the U.S. has seen the significant shift in population, that largely white non-Hispanic have been shrinking relative to other groups. And this is true in Florida as it is nationally. In fact, Florida and I guess North Carolina and some other states are ahead of the curve, where in 2027 we will be a majority-minority state. Now, this has 3 at least profound implications for the country and for Florida. The first is that the educational attainment of all of our citizens is too low. You look at all is 27.7, and I'm sure you don't remember looking at those other slides, but even South Korea is well over 30% of its citizens attaining a bachelor's degree, and a large percentage of those in engineering and the sciences, which leads to innovation and economic development. It's not just the graduation rate, but it's the participation rate. If you take the high school students coming out of high school in 2005 and say, how many of which groups entered the SUS? White females are enter at the highest rate, and any going around campuses, the sex ratio is more and more skewed. So nationally, it's about 60%. If you look at this, the problem is getting all students into college, because you cannot sustain African-American males at 15.5% when we're talking about standard diplomas coming out of high school. So those 3 challenges: 1, our high school population is flat. It has been growing for the past 10 years, and we have had the luxury of all of that growth. 2, the demographic shift and 3, not enough are, even of those that are graduating, are entering a 4-year system where they have the highest probability of graduating. In fact, the probability of getting a bachelor's degree is almost 5 times if you enter the SUS than if you enter a community college system. Graduation rates in Florida continue to stay ahead of the region, but that's really as a result of a couple of institutions. 7 of our institutions still do not graduate half the students in 6 years. All that investment does not yield the kind of returns that we need unless that student graduates. And I don't think that we're spending enough time on strategies to keep students in school and keep them graduating. Access and affordability. In Florida, on average, the middle-income family would spend 40% of its income to send their child to college. Nationally, it's 16%. How can that be? The easiest explanation is these are the percentage of family income after financial aid. Florida puts up 11 cents for every dollar in need-based financial aid. Better states 89 cents, and many states $1. So we are putting about 1/10 of what other states do in need-based financial aid. And therefore, the net cost to the family to attend school is almost 40% of their income. Given all those other returns on investment, I think it's a huge positive public policy issue to make more investments to get more students in school. Just look at the return on taxes alone that was mentioned earlier. Even though most students, if you read the Spellings report, you would think the average tuition in the United States was $25,000. You can see that the majority of students in the United States, 42% attend schools that are under $5,000. And about 65% are still attending low-cost schools. One thing that I'm sure most people sitting here are not aware of is that 1/3 of the cost of tuition does not contribute to the education of that student, because 1/3 of the cost of tuition goes directly into student activities and service fees. So it goes to the health department on campus, it goes to athletic tickets, it goes to concerts, it goes to the gym and the swimming pool. So of the $3,000 that comes into Florida, any Florida school, $2,000 of it goes into the core operation of the institution, and $1,000 goes into student amenities. And students are insatiable when it becomes amenities. You can't have enough swimming pools, theaters, food options. One of the things that the United States has done and the international community has done over the past 25 years is do literacy tests of college graduates. And PROS is, can a college graduate read a page of a story and describe it to somebody? A document is just what it says, a document with directions. Can a student follow, or can an individual with a bachelor's degree follow careful directions? And finally, can they do basic quantitative material? If you look, I think everyone would agree of two things. One, once again, just as the older population in the U.S. is better educated than the younger, they seem to do better and do better on standard literacy skills. And it is not, if you look at the state of Florida, 1992 was the last year that class, which is not, I've taken it myself, so I know that it's, other than dividing fractions, it's not all that hard. But you can see, this is unacceptable. I mean, I don't see how we can sit around and say that 55% of people can do 10th grade math. The best schools, only 76% of the students passed all on their first try. And at the weaker schools, 32%. That, I mean, last year, all the provosts, the national group was called together in Seattle, and we were chewed out by Boeing Corporation and Microsoft. and they said, "We love the best students that you send us, but we resent having to give employment tests to college graduates and in some cases remediate them. That is unacceptable." And I know that people have gotten letters like this if you work on a campus. I spoke with you, the Times was full, and excuse my absence. This person actually had 60 hours of credit, a native English speaker, and this was a letter for a grade appeal. Completely unacceptable.
Larry, just as a footnote, that was at FSU? I mean, that's what we all want to know. But,
Kyle, I'm really sorry. I was not going to identify the student.
You said native speaker, so it wasn't me.
So one of the things that the Spellings Commission proposed and actually tried to get written into law during this last congressional session in the Higher Education Reauthorization Act was federal mandates regarding value-added and testing in four-year institutions. My personal feeling is things hardly ever get better with more government involved. So a group of people got together, organizations of universities, and established a voluntary system of accountability and looked at all of the exams out there in the country and went through and found some that had a lot of promise. What we wanted to do was to offer universities on a voluntary system an accountability system that would allow them to monitor and assess student progress and would provide a lot of information available to parents. So the reason that we ended up going with testing is we felt that you could map it to the curriculum. It's easily monitored. You can give them online. They can be secure in various ways. And we felt that if we started with first time in college students, we could adjust their curriculum or other activities as we assess their progress moving through the 4 years, 5 years, 6 years of college. So what we ended up, we looked at something called the Collegiate Learning Assessment, and the reason that we like this exam is that it gives you a problem that you have to analyze and solve. And in this case, your firm is buying an airplane, and the day that they're supposed to purchase it, there's a crash of that particular model. And you're given 90 minutes and access. You have to request information. This is a web-based test, to write a 3-page memo either supporting or not that particular choice of airplane. So, for instance, you could pull down the specifications of it, the technical data, the FAA crash report, take all that information, analyze it, summarize it, and get it in, so that it's not arithmetic or it's not grammar. It is the assessment. Can you analyze data, critically assemble it, and present it in a meaningful way to others? We've been giving it now for 2 years at Florida State University, and a little black dot is us, which means that our students are scoring as incoming freshmen about where they would be expected to score. You know, we kind of hope for a little better, but that's okay. The value of this is you get 4 scores on every single student. You get writing, analytical thinking, critical thinking, and a little bit of quantitative. Then you can take that score and assess the student in terms of the courses that they're going to be taking, and then they do it in the sophomore year, junior year, and one hopes that score moves up over those 4 years so that you will have a value-added component to that test. And finally, we're going to, we've been through about 6 of these. I know Ron Berkman just got back from a meeting where they were revising it. But for parents and the public, we want every university to have a report card that summarizes for the parents how much financial aid is available. It's got a cost to attend calculator based on the financial aid of that institution. It tells you about the diversity of that institution and a great deal more about it to achieve the status of a kind of a report card. And then Mark should really review these since he thought to put them together and tell us what we need to do now.
One of the challenges that we have in addressing accountability is to identify what really matters to us, because accountability issues, while they're critical because we're moving more towards performance, still in all, if we don't spend time on some broader issues, we'll forget why we are working with so many students. And so we've spent some time putting together in the board office 3 different values, guiding principles, if you will, that we think are critical. First of all, we think it's important for our public universities to have a strong discourse of quality and to insist on quality. In essence, because we're public, we should not settle for second best. We want the best in class for all of our citizens who attend the state university system. Mediocrity as a norm or as a standard for us should not be acceptable. Second of all, we recognize that we graduate our students into a global labor market, not a Florida labor market, not a labor market that is defined by I-10 or I-95 or Calle Ocho. So our approach is that access without quality is not going to prepare our students for success in the global economy. We do want a world-class state university system, and while that is obviously rhetorically we can be very comfortable with that, the end result is, because it is our students who are the product of our effort, we should expect that wherever the world of work would take them, they would be prepared. So therefore, quality and competitiveness are guiding principles that we talk a lot about in the Board of Governors. And then finally, as Larry has mentioned, we're moving to a greater attention to accountability. Here, because we are public, efficiency and transparency is part of accountability, but the end result is performance is as well. And you will see this afternoon and tomorrow and over the next couple of months in the legislative sessions where our legislature is going to talk more and more about performance, which in part is defined as graduation rate, and which in part is defined as first and second year retention, which in part is focused around having better utilization of our space. And I know we do very well. I would put our space utilization as a system up against space utilization of any other system in the country. But the end result is that we can and will have to do better. As well, legislators and others often see us always with our hand out asking for more. Well, the end result is we will be taking in this decade nearly 100,000 students new to our system. We will grow by that much at current rates of growth. So the legislature and the state of Florida will not be getting something for nothing. And that's why, in part, we need to emphasize our performance and that we're doing better with what we have. And I know that at each of your institutions, your presidents and you have initiated those discussions, and of course, this current discussion about a 4% cutback and possibly more accelerates and heightens that attention to those concerns.
You know, Mark, you mentioned the global competition, and I hate anecdotes because, you know, you can pick one that just fits your topic and not back it up. But I visited my son's firm in London a couple of weeks ago, and he does all of his computer software work, outsources it to India. So he's got about 25 employees, contract employees there. All of the mathematics is done in Russia. He contracts that. Printing was done in Hong Kong, and that's too expensive. He's moved it to Vietnam. So he is hiring college graduate engineers, PhD mathematicians, who are highly qualified, highly skilled, at 20% of what it would cost him to bring a U.S. or a British citizen into the firm. That is happening, as we all know, over and over and over around the world. And if the United States doesn't invest more than that, the number of engineers being trained in India and China and other countries, the innovation, the numbers of patents, the research drive will occur elsewhere, and we might be the last Americans to enjoy this standard of living.
On that happy note, I saw a few people that were not introduced, and one is our Board of Governors member Lynn Pappas that slipped in. I want to make sure you recognize her. President Ammons is here. Cindy O'Connell from the University of Florida. And I know Roland Daniels is in this room because I spoke to him. And are there any other trustees or presidents in the back that I missed? Dick Beard is there, my friend. So we want everyone to participate in the conversation. I'm sorry if I missed anyone else. Chancellor, forgive me.
Larry, so we've intended this to kind of tune up, if you will, conversation that we could have about national trends, about accountability, about competitiveness, about how we should defend and emphasize our quality. We really do intend this as a very open discussion, and we would welcome any comments or thoughts as it relates to that.
Of our system, with the testing that you were mentioning, who else is doing that in our system? I should know that answer, but I don't.
These tests have only been out 3 years. Tests that are built around value added. So the class has a specific score. You pass or fail. These 3 tests, there's 3 of them, collegiate academic assessment and progress, and then MAP, measuring academic assessment and progress, is something like that. There's 3 of them out there that have different roles, and that the 2 that we've selected are the MAP, which that allows you to do more of a content assessment, and then the CLA, more writing, critical thinking, and analysis. So I don't think any school, we're in a consortium, I think Ohio State, the University of Texas system, Auburn, and about, I don't know, large publics, there's about 10 right now. And we're sharing data and looking at ways to drill down a little bit in the data and find out what we can do to improve those characteristics of students.
Are others thinking about it on that?
Right now, as you may recall, Governor Duncan, the board has had a conversation about learning and measuring learning, which we have asked each of our institutions through their learning compact exercise to carry out. And we've been in and out of the testing issue. As you know, that's part of a larger conversation in the state of Florida that is still hotly discussed. But the answer is no, we do not do system-wide testing. And I think, in fact, Larry, your testing is on a sampling basis. You are, and those institutions are sampling. They're not necessarily making it mandatory. Could you talk about that a little bit?
We do 300, or about 400 freshmen. Now, since the test is voluntary, we give them a gift card if they take the test. And I visited other places, and Ohio State said students won't get up early for $50. You got to go to $75 if you want them to actually come in and do this. So we negotiated with a company to buy gift certificates at a discount, and then so we do 300 freshmen, and we follow that group. We do 100 seniors to compare to that, and then follow the 300 through the 4 years. We also did for class, we arranged for 400 students, and that turned out to be February 17th when it dropped to 17 degrees in Florida, and the test was at 8 a.m., and we did get 92 out of the 400 to show up. We had got 3 kids who showed up who weren't registered because they heard about the $75. And We took them in, of course. So that's,
So basically, the issue of testing coming out of, at the national level, it still needs an awful lot of work. And the broader challenge that we have as a system is to ensure that the students that we are educating are learning. And that really is why we started down the road of the accountability in terms of the academic learning compacts. And that's juxtaposed against, of course, the demands for access. So at two levels, you see, we're going to be challenged in terms of our performance. One is providing for the new students who are going to be coming in, and second of all, to ensure that they're actually learning what they need to learn in order to be competitive in the global marketplace.
the problem, I'm not a big fan of academic learning compacts. I think the concept is very good, and what you want the student to know is very good. But, you try and get your classics faculty to say how they're going to certify that the student is fluent in ancient Greek in some way other than an exam. And there's a lot of, it's such a good concept until you try and get a faculty to work on it. And then it kind of slips a little bit. In fact, they can get downright ugly.
But Larry, what is the cost of this exam?
Actually, they're pretty cheap, $20, $20 a student, which we also pay. We're thinking next year about integrating it as a requirement for freshmen. The problem, we were going to do it this year, but the company said they could not handle 6,500 students while they're doing all the rest of the country. In fact, Educational Testing Service originally proposed that we do a pre- and post-test GRE, but when they looked at the numbers, they just didn't feel like they could handle them. I mean, look at, FCAT does about 2 million exams, and it doesn't go real smoothly. And you're talking about, there's approximately 16 million college students. A lot of money on the table, and certainly during the congressional hearings, there were more lobbyists in the audience than there were academics, salivating at the thought of 16 million new customers that had to buy the product.
The questions and comments, this is a conversation that we all want to participate. So questions or any other question. John, and then Pepis.
First of all, I thought it was an excellent presentation. And I think one of the most important comments that Larry made was the 11 cents on the dollar that Florida puts on the table for need-based financial aid. I just had lunch with our new member of our House delegation, Clay Ford, and he pointed out that because he needed to be employed, it took him 11 years to finish his finance degree. And I think that's a factor that we just need to address in the state, is the need for need-based financial aid, because that is a huge driver of graduation rates. When you can't afford to stay in school and you have to step out because the financial aid is not available, that slows down your progress, and in the long run costs the state a lot more than it should otherwise if they had front-loaded the financial aid and get that student through and into a good job on the far side of graduation.
Thank you. Governor Pappas?
I actually have a different question, but to follow up on that thought, on the funding side, and I don't know if this thing is on, but on the funding side, I think at one point in these discussions we had a series of pie charts or something that demonstrated backing up to the revenue side how the overall state budget is allocated. And one of the dilemmas about the revenue issue is, especially at this point in time, there's never enough money to fund everything. So part of what we've got to have a better understanding of is there may just not be more money for a while, or the prospect of putting more money to the SUS means taking it away from resources that we're not going to be politically successful. And I'm not saying it's not a dialogue that needs to continue to be had, but understanding that or reminding or refreshing us about that would be helpful. And one of the things that I'm constantly confused about is it a revenue problem or is it an allocation problem? In other words,
this is a relatively low-tax state, and what's gone on recently with ad valorem is a good example of the mindset. So we're not, in comparison with other states that are spending more on public education, where do we fall out in the revenue side? Because if we're looking for more dollars, we've got to start understanding better the sources of where we fit in that picture. The question I wanted to ask relevant to the performance issue is, somewhere along this continuum, the issue of where the kids are when they get out of high school and come to college is a big part of the equation. And when you look at those numbers, Larry, that showed the declining graduation rates, if less students are matriculating out of high school and into college on a percentage basis, even though we're having more numbers in the gross sense, we might be having lower percentages. Is that a significant issue in terms of performance in college, that the kids aren't just aren't prepared, or medium or low, or?
Larry, do you want to comment? Or anyone else?
The students that enter the SUS are by and large very well prepared out of high school. If you look at the entrance requirements at most of the institutions, or virtually all of the institutions, the students are coming in with 22 or 23 academic credits, and they're pretty strong. We're just not getting enough of the high school students. We've been dead flat in percent participation since 1999. And what we need to do is get a larger percentage of all groups coming out of high school to enter. A lot of students go to community college, but the churn rate in a community college is just so high. I mean, about 65% of the kids, not just in Florida, nationally, are gone after 9 months. And of that group, only half even make it on what's left to get a baccalaureate degree. So there's some issues of preparation, and that's probably the group that ends up going initially to a community college. But it's just we need to get more people who finish high school into college. I don't know where Florida ranks right now. I haven't looked but we were very, very low nationally in terms of the percentage of our standard high school diplomas that entered college. And, we can't sustain that. I know tax reform is an ugly issue. We found $398 million for Bright Futures. We could open up 4 University of North Floridas and run them for free. For free. 50,000 students could go to college for nothing by diverting those dollars into something else. And I can make a couple of political comments about selling lotto tickets in poor neighborhoods and transferring the money to rich neighborhoods, and that's an easy test, but I haven't gotten any traction on that one.
But we'll go on now to Chairman Johnson. We're going to come around the table.
Well, the shocking thing to me about all these numbers is that these are the exact same trends that existed 20 years ago when I was chairman of Senate Education, and we've been on this treadmill for all these years, and what we really need is a better product out of high school. When we passed the accountability bill for the state of Florida, and we required 4 years of mathematics, the public school boards adopted as many as 58 different math courses you could take without taking 1 year of algebra. Now, you can't pass the SAT without taking algebra, in my opinion, and I'm not an admissions officer, but we need a better product all along the line. And if we don't get that better product along the line, we can suffer and spend money and do all these things, but we're not going to become an international competitor. And by the way, Dr. Robert Morgan of Florida State University got the contract to redo the entire Korean education system. You saw them #1 on this board today. The state of Florida basically ignored Dr. Robert Morgan.
Is that right?
In Korea, when the government gives an order, everyone follows it. We have 67 independently elected school boards in Florida, and they adopted one curriculum for the whole country. So you couldn't take checkbook 101 instead of Algebra 1. Everybody took Algebra 1, Algebra 2, analytical geometry, and trig. As Senator Johnson said, up until very recently, you could basically get out of high school, if you could dial a telephone. And when they required 2 maths, that was a big deal, Algebra 1 and 2.
They don't dial anymore, Larry.
One of the beautiful part about public service for people like me that didn't come from this background is the relationship with provosts. They're wonderful people, aren't they? Wonderful people. Governor Martin.
Larry, we talked about the test being voluntary based on your experience, and you're going to track the success of the students over a 4-year period. Does that mean that you assign a counselor to them to work with them to determine the course selection?
About 5 years ago, we invested in about 50 new counselors and found that one counselor could interact with about 350 students, because among that 350, half just take care of themselves, and then you have a percentage that needs time. So every student now has to go in and go over their curriculum. For these students, we're paying close attention to those. There's 5 scores possible on the exam. The 2 that we're looking closely at is below expected and well below expected. Those are the 2 groups of students that we're pulling in and monitoring very closely. And they will have an individual advisor throughout that time.
Right. Larry, I had a question on your sample. How did you get that sample of 300? And are there any differences in that sample between in-state and out-of-state? Were there some that were in-state and out-of-state, and how were they performing? And what would happen with the bubble relative to the SAT score if all of your entering students took this exam?
The sample is a stratified random sample to represent the university, and our out-of-state tuition in the state of Florida now is so high that there's not enough out-of-state students to even sample.
Even with the football team, huh?
Never occurred to me to sample them. And your question on the bubble, I didn't understand that one.
Well, but in other words, were the 300 anomalous in terms of the selection?
No, they're totally random, and well, they're not totally random, but you start with a sample of 1,600, and that is randomly drawn from the freshman class. Then you've got to get them to come in and take the exam. So within the random sample, people had to come in and take the exam. We couldn't force them to.
People who wanted the $75.
Right. And, at that time when we started, we actually had a winning football team, so we thought we would invite them to the president's box, but as the season wore on, that became less attractive.
Was there any comparison among the group, the individuals in the group, in terms of how they did based on their entry-level scores on SATs or ACTs or whatever? Was there any correlation between that and the scores they got on this exam?
Interestingly, there wasn't. We haven't finished really drilling down, but the thing that seemed to matter most was the rigor of the writing program in high school. If they came from a small high school with a lot of writing and feedback, they tended to score better. But there wasn't. If you look at that, you can see that about 1,600 is the highest anybody can score on the exam, and even students with 1,590 didn't really approach that 1,600. Yeah, right. Yeah, but remember, this is aggregated. If you disaggregate it, it's not type. The reason that it's aggregated is I was interested to know how we did against other universities with a similar student profile. And as you can see, kind of in the middle.
A couple of follow-ups, basically. Seeing that there were differences based on the schools that the students came from, was there any follow-up then with those schools to try to address curriculum issues maybe?
Not at this time. I mean, like most schools in Florida, we probably draw from 80 or 90 high schools.
The other question is, were there specific courses that students were taking that were monitored between the time that they took the first exam and the time that they took the last exam?
We had them take all 4 exams at the same sitting, and that it might have been not a good strategy because it took about 4 hours.
No, but I mean, were you tracking the courses?
We don't have enough data yet on that.
No?
We only have 2 samples at this time. There's a question here.
Thank you.
Substantiate what Larry's talking about here. This is not a state problem. This is a national problem. And I recall at a meeting at Florida State that a team of FSU people went to Korea to help them with their education programs. Well, they're number 1 now. You read that. That came across 33, way above where we are. And I asked a question. I said, how come you're helping Korea and not helping Florida or the United States? And they said what Larry mentioned before, was that when they presented the program to the educators in Korea, the dictator was in the room. And if the educators didn't follow what the program was, they were history. Maybe we need a little more of that accountability and some kind of strong power, because frankly, this is a national problem. We've all been listening the last few days about the bridge in Minneapolis. And they're talking about the bridges of the country. We should be talking about education of the country. And the bridges of the country need a lot of money, and we're spending billions of dollars in Iraq. And I'm not quoting one way or the other here, but the point is, this is a national problem. How do we achieve the items that we're talking about here, the guiding principles for the university system in Florida? Our first thought, of course, is Florida. But we're really talking about the country. And to get this done, you need funds. And if we don't have the funds, we're not going to get quality, competitiveness, and accountability. You note that the cost of the Ivy League school is pretty high compared to what it costs to go to Florida. Well, I can assure you the quality is there, because I'm a product of that quality at the Ivy League schools. And I was able to be involved in what you're talking about here, competitiveness. I was able to lead an international organization because of my education. We have to have quality education in this state. And to get that done, we need funding. Larry, have you presented this program and this entire thing to the governor? Because the governor would like Florida to be a leader in the country in education. Have you presented this to the governor? What's your answer, Larry?
No, I haven't. There's a little political commentary moving around here.
I'm finished.
Yes, sir. Speak loudly so we can all.
Larry, I understand why you would want to look at those 2 groups from them that you've had. But could you say something about what is the philosophy and what is the direction you're going to go in analyzing even those 2 groups? What have you found within those 2 groups so far?
I guess as a parent and an employer, I want students who finish school to be able to, when my younger son got in trouble in elementary school, because we used to play this game called the crap detector. And I would read a ad from the paper and say, what do you think of this? And they would get points if they could disassemble it and say, well, that's ridiculous. Why would you take $1,000 off a car if you're going to pay 9.5% or 10%? I want to interact with students and citizens who think critically about issues, can describe them to others both orally and in writing. And that's what we're looking at our curriculum to make sure that students have those skills.
I'm thinking more of once there is a problem identified, as will be identified by those two groups, then what kind of corrective measures are in place, even though it's still early in the game, so that
we have a very, very good writing lab. And we have a very, very good writing lab, and the students would be assigned to that and assigned topics and papers. And how the writing lab works is you come in, you're given a topic, you don't choose it, and you write an essay on it, and then through an iterative process, you rewrite and grade it. And students, it doesn't take that long for students to improve if they get one-on-one detailed feedback. And, Governor Stavros, I believe that every child, if they had the right resources, can achieve those skills. But it's just tough to do.
May I follow up with one question, please, Madam Chair? You mentioned before, Larry, about those who do not stay in school or finish their education. The governor keeps talking about access, and we have a certain amount of access. We've got certain programs that take stock in children, the programs you've talked about before. Is there some way that we can have a program where once someone starts in the university, that they stay and they complete? It's obvious from all the records that I've seen that if 20% at least drop out before they finish. Once they start the university, they never finish. That's a loss of funds, as you mentioned before. It's a loss of money. Is there some way we can have a program where once somebody starts, that we follow through and increase and improve the graduation rates?
Well, let me congratulate the University of Florida and thank them for being so open and willing to share. They took their, when Sandy Dallenbert and John Lombardi were presidents respectively, Sandy enjoyed tweaking John because our graduation rate was ahead of theirs. And he must have tweaked him a little more than he wanted to, because they put in a tracking and advising program, and they have gone from below us to about 10 or 15% points above. And we have a very rigorous now modified program of tracking at Florida State University, and since we put it into place in only a few years, we've gained 6 percentage points in graduation. And I know 2 percentage points doesn't sound like much for retention, but if you're talking about going from the freshman to the sophomore year, 2% is about 140 students that you've now saved and moved on to the system. I think it's an excellent system. I think we were way too nice to students. We were cutting them way too much slack, and we're not quite as draconian as our friends at UF, but tightening it up really made a difference. I mean, if you don't take these courses in this sequence, then you've got to go do something else, because you're not going to be a business major. You did not pass calculus in your sophomore year. And by putting those things into place and the software to monitor it and put stops on registration has helped. But you just cannot, basically, if you give the students a little bit of wiggle room, they'll get out of it. So you have to be very, very strict on making sure that student declares a major. And we have where you can declare your humanities, social sciences, or sciences. But if you're in sciences, you better have finished calculus 2 by the end of your sophomore year, or you can't do it. So by putting those into place, and the University of Florida was great. I mean, we had sent a group down there, and they spent 2 days going through every aspect of their tracking program. the strengths and weaknesses. We shared what we had learned, and it was very, very positive.
And on that, we should...
President Amos. President Amos. Sorry.
Governor Stavros, I want to add something to Larry's comments. This issue of improving graduation rates is very complex. And a part of what Larry talked about explains when students are from well-resourced families. When you take a look at the data on graduation rates nationally, one of the factors that influences persistence to graduation is family income. And so when you talk about a system that will improve the graduation rates, it would have to be a system to include some of the tracking and advisement that's being done, but having access to financial resources so that students don't have to stop out and work and then come back and save up money and drop out again, prolonging their graduation rate. But financial resources from the family play an important role in a student's ability to persist to graduation. So if you're talking about doing a system, we also have to look at financial aid, scholarships, etc.
President Ammons, we've been able to graduate 68% of Pell-eligible students. So you have the very poorest of students, first generation, and by basically monitoring them almost daily, they have the same graduation rate as others. Now, we do take all of the first generation money and put it in those students. But it would not work, and it didn't work until we did that very, very close monitoring and making sure that every student, every term, stayed on track. And that, you know, if their grade point drops 0.25, even if they're at 3.5, they drop to 3.25, there's a stop on their registration, and they have to go see their advisor. What happened this term? Why did it drop down? That does two things. It lets the student know that people are paying attention, and sometimes there is a problem that the student didn't want to seek help for, but when they're called in, they'll talk about it. So it can be done, but it does take both of those things, not just one.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Provost Abel. All of us learned from that interaction. Thank you.
If I could, just as we conclude, I want to tie a couple of points together. That it's appropriate that we end on the discussion of graduation rates, because that is a key element of performance, and we will be sensitive, have to be sensitive to the fact that a number of our institutions might have as a mission access for place-bound students who will not be full-time students and who will not intend to graduate in a rapid period of time. We're going to be talking about that more as a board, and hopefully your boards will. But we know that the legislature increasingly will be focused on graduation and retention rates. And in fact, Governor Stavros, we do have in the discussion this afternoon on our budget some initiatives that do relate to finding a means to have better tracking systems and advising systems in our institutions. Second of all, to go to the point of the last discussion, to tie it with Mr. Kavanaugh, President Kavanaugh's question, the issue of financial aid, there is a disproportion in the state at this point in terms of how we invest our financial aid resources. Of the $650 million that is appropriated, about $400 million goes to Bright Futures, which is a no-need program. 42% of our students have Bright Futures, and that undoubtedly helps them. And many of you, I'm sure, have family members or relatives who were beneficiaries of Bright Futures. Compare that to the $150 million that goes to need-based financial aid. And you will see that, in effect, we have far fewer resources going to the need of 60-some% of our students than we do to the no need of 40% of our students. So this is a challenge that we're going to need to work together on if we are to address one component of the performance gap that we are seeing. And that ends to this point, which goes to Lynn Pappas's question. Is this a revenue problem or an allocation problem? The rule of thumb that we know comes out of the legislature is that every year the legislature will have to invest about $800 million more in Medicaid, will have to invest about $1 billion more in K through 12, and about $200 million more in criminal justice, meaning that every year there is a $2 billion negative before we could even start to have the conversation about higher ed, not even the public universities, but higher ed more generally. So our boards have their work cut out for them over the next couple of years because we are in a negative situation, which is made worse by the fact that we have these continuing incremental recurring costs of those three programs that have to be addressed. So is this a revenue problem or an allocation problem? There is a taxation commission that is now looking at how we will finance Florida's needs over the next 20 years. Probably you, as local board members, will need to get involved in that discussion because, in essence, we have an antiquated financing system for a megatrend state that is rapidly growing, that is losing its competitiveness. And so, therefore, we might be able to make some progress in addressing that issue through that Taxation and Reform Commission. Having said that, what this board has at least determined to do is to begin to look at tuition as a vehicle in the short term to help us maintain our competitiveness. But, and this is where it ties in, we will come back to our local boards and ask them to look carefully at how some tuition dollars can be used for need-based assistance. And across time, we may be able to put more need-based assistance we should be able to put more need-based assistance into our neediest students as our tuition increases as a means by which to offset the financial need for them. So we're going to continue to have more conversations about this. We will be spending a lot of time with our presidents on these issues and hopefully local boards. Madam Chair, some of these issues we will discuss this afternoon. I'd like to turn the program back to you.
Thank you very much. We will now have lunch, and someone I'm sure will direct us to lunch. President Genchef, would you like to make comments since you've been so lovely to host us today?
We're very happy to host the board and all of the Board of Trustee members, and we're very proud of our university, and we'll work with everybody to make sure that the system is as fabulous as it can be. Lunch is in the next room.
Thank you.
Thank you.